Republican Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, says it's the end of the public school system as we know it. Good morning, everyone. I'm Joy Reid, and welcome back to AM Joy. Dan Patrick was responding to an historic directive from the Obama administration saying schools must allow transgender students access to such facilities consistent with their gender identity.
The challenge here is not to isolate anybody. It's not to discriminate against anybody. It's not to make anybody unsafe. It's actually to ensure that our schools are as inclusive and respectful and safe as they can possibly be.
The move, which LGBT groups say is groundbreaking, comes as the federal government battles North Carolina on HB 2, which bans transgender people from using the restrooms of the gender they identify with, unless it matches the sex on their birth certificate. Attorney General Loretta Lynch gave a passionate speech on Monday announcing the government's lawsuit against North Carolina and telling transgender people that history is on their side.
But no matter how isolated, no matter how afraid, and no matter how alone you may feel today, know this, that the Department of Justice, and indeed the entire Obama administration, want you to know that we see you, we stand with you, and we will do everything we can to protect you going forward.
Back with me now is Leah Rigueur from the Harvard Kennedy School, and joining us, Republican strategist and former White House aide Giancarlo Perisutti, and transgender activist Pauline Park. She's chair of the New York Association for Gender Rights Advocacy, and from Washington, D.C., former RNC spokesperson Genevieve Wood. I'm going to actually come to you first on this, Pauline, because the question of bathrooms has suddenly become the hottest sort of issue in conservative circles. What does it actually mean for transgender people to then have to confront this question at the restroom of which room to go into?
Well, of course, transgender people have been using restrooms, public restrooms, for decades, ever since public restrooms have been around. The interesting question is, why now? I think you have to situate this in the context of the religious right, and they're losing the marriage equality battle, and having really not much else going for them when it comes to trying to hold back or even roll back LGBT rights. And so the bathroom panic is really, I think, nothing more than a pretext to roll back not only LGBT rights, but civil rights more generally.
Yeah, and you know, to that point of bathroom panic, which is the term I've coined for it as well, the sort of apocalyptic language, Genevieve, that you've heard from Republicans on this. You have Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson releasing a statement on Friday on the school directive, calling it offensive, intrusive, and total lacking in common sense. You have Mike Huckabee tweeting on Friday something that I don't even know how to explain this. It tells you a lot about a man and his priorities. He's talking about Barack Obama when he spends more time pushing transgender bathrooms than he does improving high school graduation rates or decreasing black-on-black violence. And finally, I want to have us listen to North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory last week on Monday talking about the opposition from the federal government to HB 2. Let's listen to Pat McCrory.
Right now, the Obama administration is bypassing Congress by attempting to rewrite the law and set basic restroom policies, locker room policies, and even shower policies for public and private employers across the country.
Genevieve, why has this become such an issue of sort of apocalyptic importance to Republicans right now?
Well, because I think right now the Obama administration has grossly overstepped its bounds. I mean, look, they're using a 1972 law dealing with Title IX that was supposed to give equal access and making sure that women and girls were not discriminated against in the educational arena and sports arena. And that is very different than now saying that law means that boys who are 14 years old or 13 years old or whatever age you decide that they are actually a girl should be able to shower with 14-year-old girls in their locker room. I mean, this is not just about what bathroom you go to. This law specifically says if a young boy or young girl decide that they're the opposite sex, if they go on a school trip, for instance, and the kids all have to stay in a hotel room together, a boy and girl can be forced in the same hotel room because he's saying that he's a girl. I understand a parent being concerned about that. And I also understand a young girl being concerned about that. And look, should we be treating people fairly and not discriminate? Absolutely. And you've seen school districts dealing with this issue on their own, coming up with other ways of handling it. You don't need the federal government to jump in like this and go overboard and say, well, to treat one group the right way, we're now going to treat other people unfairly, which I think it's unfair to say to a young girl, you've got to shower naked next to another boy. I just think that's unfair.
Well, we're going to come back and I want to talk a little bit more about the issue of children, but this issue started with HB2 dealing with adults and use of restrooms. So I want to ask you, Genevieve, should a transgender man with a mustache and beard be forced to walk into the women's room? And should women be forced to feel comfortable with a man with a mustache and beard in the ladies' room?
No, I think that's the point. I think
that's what would happen if this law is implemented, is that transgender men who have beards and mustaches will be in the ladies' room because the law says they have to be in there.
No, the North Carolina law said that if you are a biological male, you go to a male bathroom. If you're a biological woman, you go to a female's bathroom.
No, it says you have to go where your your birth certificate says. So if you were born female and you've transitioned over and you are now a transgender man with full facial hair, you will be in the ladies' room. That's what the law says.
Okay, that may be what the law doesn't say specifically that you're saying that's what the outcome could potentially be.
That is what the outcome would be. Do you think that women should be forced to be in the restroom with somebody who is identifiably, to what they see, a man?
I don't think it's ideal, but here's the reality. I don't think a man who's gone through a full transition to become a woman is still going to have a full beard. I haven't seen that happen. The reality, I think you're picking a really extreme case and trying to go a different direction.
What about Chaz Bono? Chaz Bono would have to be in the ladies' room. Well, Chaz Bono looks like, I mean, if you see Chaz Bono would be in the ladies' room.
Yeah, but here's the reality, Joy. You have to talk about what's going to affect the most number of people. And right now, there's also, I would say, a difference between adults and children. I think the North Carolina law, I think North Carolina has a right to do what they want to do. And let's keep in mind, it was only on public facilities. Private companies, Target, for example, they can come up with whatever bathroom policy they want. And a lot of cities, for example, here in the District of Columbia, they all have just one single stall bathrooms so that you don't have to get into this debate. And so there are reasonable ways to deal with it, but coming in with a sledgehammer like the Obama administration did and forcing schools all over the country to do it their way and basically having no respect. What about young women who've been sexually abused? Do we not care about the fact that they now are going to feel traumatized by a guy standing next to them, even though that guy says he's a girl?
But do you understand, Genevieve, that a transgender woman, if Pauline is being forced to be in a men's room full of men, because the law would also say that she would have to do that, don't you think that there is a danger to a woman, a transgender woman, walking into a restroom full of men? That's the exact scenario you just described. But the law says that she has to do it.
Well, the law, depending on where you are,
that's the law that's being pushed around the country.
Look, Joy, here's the reality. If somebody is completely transgendered, they have adopted, said that they're now male or that they're now female and they're living that life. That's the bathroom they go into, but they've been fully transgendered. That is very different, I would argue, than saying a 14 or 13 or 15-year-old boy saying, well, I've decided I'm a girl, and so now I get to shower next to girls in the locker room. I think those are different scenarios, and I think what the Obama administration did here was greatly overreached by pushing this kind of action.
Let me get you in here to come to the table, Giancarlo. Just speak to the issue that Genevieve is talking about, because you yourself are acquainted with young, transgender, a child, right, that has to deal with this issue. Do you see Genevieve's point here?
I do see Genevieve's point, and I think part of the opposition to this is twofold. There's opposition to what exactly the law, both in North Carolina and the mandate that the federal government handed down, what that says and the implications of it. And then there's the very nature of the fact that conservatives, Republicans, reflexively don't believe that the federal government should be setting standards for what occurs in local schools. I am very proud that in my town, we have a transgender student in the school that both of my daughters attend. And great love and great thought and great care was put into figuring out a situation where that student could be made to feel welcomed and accommodated. And guess what? The policy that my school adopted runs counter to the guidance that the Obama administration provided. That is offensive to me, because we're not bigots, we're not closed-minded. We want what everyone wants, which is our children to feel welcomed and loved. And we tried to accommodate, my town did, I wasn't involved, my town did, in a way that brought in a child psychiatrist, that brought in obviously the child, their families, teachers, etc. That's
Yeah.
the way this should be handled.
So, Pauline, why isn't that the right answer for local school districts to set their own policies based on the individual needs of the kids that are in that school?
The problem becomes when a local school district or a state enacts policies and procedures that are blatantly discriminatory. In that case, the federal government not only has the right but the obligation to intervene.
But can you answer that question that Genevieve has raised, and I think that John Carlos alluding to? If you have girls in a locker room who feel uncomfortable with a pre-transitioning transgender student who, to their visual eyes as a boy, being in the locker or the shower with them, why shouldn't they then be able to say, we don't want that?
Right. As I like to say, where there's a will, there's a way. Every local school district should have, and does in fact have, the authority to figure out an accommodation that works for everyone. It's not about forcing anyone to be with anyone else. It's about prohibiting discrimination and figuring out a reasonable accommodation so that everyone is satisfied. And as I say, that can be done. Where there's a will, there's a way.
And I would agree with, can I just say, I would agree with Pauline on that, except that's exactly what the Obama directive just overturned and said, no, individual school districts can't deal with it on their own.
Yeah.
That's part of the problem, is that schools were beginning to deal with it, but now they've overreached and said everybody has to do it this way.
Same way. Yeah, Leah.
So here's the thing, right? So that's the job of the federal government, right? This is what it was. I mean, this is what the federal government is supposed to do. That in the case where we have a marginalized community or we have a community that is being discriminated against, it is the federal government's job to come in and protect the rights of that marginalized community that is being discriminated against.
Yep.
This is law, right? And to come in. So the interesting thing here, though, to me, is that this is a hot button issue amongst conservatives, right? This is not necessarily an issue that needs to be, that shouldn't be kind of, it shouldn't be a radical thing. And what conservatives really need to do, right? What they really need to figure out is, how is this different, right, from the civil rights movement of, say, the 1960s, right? Much of the language that is being used is identical to language that is being used during the 1960s.
Last word to you, John Carlos.
I disagree that this isn't just a conservative issue, with all due respect. This is an issue that, if raised in the course of the presidential campaign, which it will be, is not going to play well for Democrats, is not going to play well for Hillary Clinton, because reasonable people can agree,
But it also may not play for Donald Trump.
regardless of how they...
We shall see. We unfortunately